Hello. If you keep up with the channel, you will know that I recently became inspired by the great Warhammer city of Marienburg. I have decided to start on an ambitious project to build an army worthy of its awesomeness, and I want to do it in time for the release of the Old World. That project, it continues, it's moving forward, it's going well, but this is going to be something of a confessional update, because I have let fear and procrastination get the better of me. For now, I'm Jordan, this is Jordan Sorcery, and today it's time for a Marienburg Diary. Marienburgian courage. So this has been a bit delayed, this update. I've kind of put it off a little bit. I've been very busy on the channel. You will have seen a lot of cool stuff. Hopefully it's cool and you think it's cool. I've done interviews with legends from Games Workshop like Andy Chambers and Alessio Cavatore, and coming soon, Rick Priestley and Gav Thorpe. I have also spent a lot of time making shorts and putting together other projects and working on stuff for Christmas time as well, and just continuing to produce at least one video a week that I think is interesting. So there have been lots of good excuses for why I've not spent as much time at the hobby table as I probably should have, and that has meant I've been a bit more reluctant to share my progress on the Marienburg army. But that's not the only reason, and if it were, then I could probably explain it all away. But this one's going to be a little bit more honest, I guess, and that is that I've just not painted anything. Now, I talked at the start of this project about my, let's call them, issues with painting. Some of it is just a sort of general inability, so I don't have that natural talent, and I've not fostered any actual skill over the years in order to build any talent at all. I've always seen painting as that chore, something that you just, either you can put to one side or you have to do at some point, but it's kind of the last part of the process. Since starting the project, I've had a lot of great conversations with really good artists like my friend Stu from the Miniature Realms channel and Tommy Sewell from the Miniature Painting Tutor. We have talked about the philosophies of painting and some of the cool ideas about how I could approach things, and they have definitely helped me to break down that sort of, it's not a chore and you can develop the skills, and there's lots of interesting ways to take this. It doesn't have to take a long time. Now, that's not quite overcome my laziness, but it's definitely overcome some of that fear element. What I do think has been an impediment to me actually getting started, though, is that I don't have a sort of setup for painting, and because just the way my mind works, and this is probably just me, and it probably is tied to a sort of laziness and a fear as well, but I've got everything set up in this room ready to play games, ready to read the books, grab them from the shelves and do whatever. I do not have a setup ready to just start painting whenever I feel like it. So for me, there's a bit of a job to actually get all of my materials, get all of my paint, get the area ready, get it set up before I can start actually painting anything. And that's fine, it's a small problem, but it's enough of a problem to then let my brain just catch hold of it and say, oh, well, it's probably too much faff, probably too much work to even get started. It makes the whole thing feel like a big project, a big deal. Just sitting down to do some painting one day feels like work, and that's not real. That's a totally artificial thing. I've put all of my paints into a lovely Nesline Engineer's toolbox, so they're all neatly away, they're all together. It's actually very easy to grab it and get it out, but it also just, there is that psychological barrier to starting painting. I can't just sit down and get to it whenever the inspiration strikes. So what I think I'm going to do is put in my diary some scheduled times over the course of the next month to actually do my painting. I'm going to have preset slots, a couple of hours here and there that I know I'm going to do some painting. And then the day before, the night before really, I am going to set up my painting station. And I think that this might be a way to help me get over this ridiculous psychological barrier that is just any ounce of resistance to starting the painting means I don't want to do it. But so this way, I will know, okay, there's going to be a 5-minute set up the paint station job. I'm going to get all my paints out, get all my tools out, get it all ready to go. And then the next day, when I've also scheduled my time to go sit down and paint, and I know exactly what miniatures I'm going to paint, I can then sit down straight away. There are no barriers. I'm just straight into painting. So I think that this hopefully will help me through this weird sort of momentary resistance that I'm having to actually taking that next step when it comes to the painting. Now, there is still those challenges around building up the skill, choosing the specific color schemes and how I want to approach stuff. But I do feel like once I can get to that more comfortable sit down and start painting, and it's fine. It's okay. Even if I do things wrong, you can repaint things, you can try again. But it's more convenient, it's more comfortable, it's just more fluid, I guess. So that's what I've got planned for the month ahead. It's not an excuse for why I haven't done painting over the last month or two, since my last diary, where I primed a load of guys and I was ready to go. But it is an explanation, hopefully. For many people, I'm sure this probably seems like a very weird problem. It's not even really a problem, not one that anyone should really have. This is all a hobby, it's all for fun, there's no stakes here. It's purely psychological, it's probably very personal to me. I'm just working against years and years of dysfunctional hobby programming. So bear with me, there's going to be painted minis this time, next update. Right, that was my confession done. So let's talk now about what I have actually been doing with the Marienburg army, with L'Armee Trudot, what's happened to date. First, let's start with where we are at right now. I'm building a Marienburg-inspired mercenary army marching under the banners of Ponsard Trudot, a faded noble seeking to restore the glory of his family name. This is to be a mixed empire force primarily made of infantry of different shapes and sizes. As the fens and marshes of the wasteland are not ideal for heavily armoured cavalry, I'm avoiding most of the mounted options in the Empire army books. What I do want is for the infantry to reflect the diverse denizens of the great port city. So as well as men, I want halflings, I want dwarves, I want elves and ogres, and maybe even something a little bit taller. And as a collector, I also want this army to reflect the entire history of Citadel miniatures. If that's not too grand a claim. I'm not going to be grabbing something from literally every single Citadel range, but I'd love to get miniatures from different pockets and eras and times, different sculptors, different game systems, and have them all in the mix. So there's a real texture and history within the fabric of the army. I've now settled on my primary game system for the army as well. I'm intending this to be built around the 6th edition Empire, Dogs of War, and maybe even Kislev army books. Though I am planning to use the 7th edition core rules for most of my games at home. And of course, when the old world eventually releases, my hope is to be able to use this army or portions of it for that game as well. So that's the pitch, but where am I today? Well, in my previous update, which you can watch here if you've not seen it, I talked about my free company, about my greatswords, about my ogres, as well as a couple of the characters and the cannon and Hellfire volley gun that I've built. That's all put to one side and in a good spot. What I've got to do next is talk about some slayers. These are the dwarf mercenary slayers of Flint Barracrack, a roguish band of dwarven ruffians who have taken the Slayer Oath on account of the loss of their vessel, the Seabeard. Now typically, the loss of a vessel isn't cause for becoming a Slayer, but in this case it very much was. The Seabeard exploded not due to enemy fire, but due to negligence and mechanical failure. The crew had underestimated the severity of a compromised steam valve, and collectively decided to wait until they had delivered their cargo before fixing the issue. Instead, though, it caused a cascade of failures throughout the vessel, and then it detonated like a lit keg of black powder. Many of the crew perished, and the cargo was completely destroyed. And what was worse, this happened just as the Seabeard was coming into its berth in the port of Marienburg. The loss of the ship and its cargo was one thing, the catastrophic collateral damage another. But most of all, these dwarven engineers had betrayed their learning, their craft, and their guild. All reasons well worthy of seeking redemption in the eyes of their ancestors. The miniatures I'm using for this unit are the spectacular Long Drong Slayer Pirates, sculpted by Colin Dixon for the original 5th edition Dogs of War Armies book. They will be led by Flint Barracrack in the form of the White Dwarf subscriber model Long John Grombrindal from 2012, sculpted by Giorgio Bassani. I just haven't assembled him yet. There is another dwarf in this army as well, one who has no time for these failed engineers, because he himself is a master engineer, and he's kind of got a little dirty secret of his own. His name is Zebastrin Vauban. Now, Vauban has spent decades working on the dwarf seawall of Marienburg, but despite his protestations, money has repeatedly been diverted away from the maintenance of the wall by some of the less scrupulous burgomeisters who are supposed to be in charge of keeping the city safe. Vauban is a dwarf of principle, and after discovering the negligence of his so-called superiors, he confronted them in public, a noble but ineffective approach, as the weasel words and financial tomfoolery of these burgomeisters ensured that he was ignored, and indeed painted as an untrustworthy blackguard. He was removed from his post and has struggled to get work in the city as a result. That was until Ponsard Trudot offered him a chance to earn a living well beyond the city walls, and thankfully Ponsard was willing to hire the engineer's unusual ward as well. The ratling, who calls himself Corbel Raton, has been a loyal apprentice to the dwarven engineer ever since Vauban discovered the abandoned Skaven pup in one of the drainage chambers beneath the seawall. Despite his natural hatred for the chaotic rat things, he couldn't bring himself to destroy this defenseless runt. Instead, he has raised Corbel, and against all odds has discovered that not every ratman is quite as innately evil as the dwarf originally thought. At least, that's how it seems for now, but, you know, he is a Skaven, so who knows for sure, right? For Vauban, I am using the Master Engineer with Great Weapon released around 7th edition. The name and some of his backstory was actually inspired by the French military engineer and Marshal of France, Sébastien Leprest de Vauban, who worked for King Louis XIV. Now, it's quite possible that I studied this guy during my school years when we were talking about the run-up to the Enlightenment, but honestly, I have completely forgotten that. And it was when I was doing research for my video on Games Workshop's involvement in the Crystal Maze that I came across Vauban and his words about the creation of Fort Boyard. Not the TV show, the original fort. So I thought he sounded pretty cool, and I wanted to try and harness some of that coolness to include in my army. For Vauban's Skaven ward, I am actually using a miniature that was unreleased. It's said to have been part of the Skaven Adventure Pack that was planned for the original Warhammer Quest. I actually talked about this in my original video on Warhammer Quest, which was, I think, the second video I put out on the channel way back when, in the dark ages of 2022. You can go and watch that video right here. I then went on to buy a version, well, a copy of this miniature, which, like I say, unreleased and quite rare, but I wanted to treat myself when I reached 1,000 subscribers on the channel. So that was why I bought him, and he means a lot to me as a result. I absolutely adore this miniature. I think he's really super cute. I wanted an excuse to find a way to put him into a project. So yeah, this is very stretchy of the lore and the rules even, but I wanted to make it work. And this is my army, so that's why there's a Skaven Ratman who's a good guy. I mean, just look at this miniature. It's absolutely awesome. I also really like the idea of a noble little rat mechanic just doing his best. And as a side note, there is probably only one comic book that has genuinely made me shed a tear, and it was the result of the actions of an incredibly heroic rat guy in the comic book Okko. Now, I think that these furballs can make for true heroes in the right story. I was gifted an awesome captain miniature by fan of the channel, Craig Baker. This fish hat wearing hero is going to be a captain in my next Free Company unit. Thank you, Craig, for sending me this mini. It's really ace. I love it. I also mentioned last time that I was going to include the Empire captain with the gory blade in my army. I am doing that, but there was a little bit of a disaster with this guy. So I bought one in Finecast, which I pretty foolishly left all day in Paint Stripper with a load of metal models. Now, that is totally on me. I completely forgot that that's definitely something you shouldn't do. So now he is very bendy and squidgy, kind of like the old Trebor Mr. Soft adverts. It also seems like a lot of the detail has been lost on him. So I have instead had to rebuy him as a metal version, who I have successfully stripped without destroying. So my score sheet is 50-50 for the gory blade. I have also begun assembling a unit of Nuln Ironsides. These are the heavily armoured gunners that were released by Forge World alongside the Tamarkan book. They came in an upgrade pack that still required you to use the gun arms from a regular box of Empire handgunners, but makes for just a beautiful unit. These guys are really super cool. And these guys will be marching under the orders of Captain Nathaniel Harcourt, a scoundrel of a man who is a rotten sport, but is nonetheless a very fine shot. There has also been another addition to L'Armee Trudot, one that dramatically raises the average height of the members of the army by quite some way, even with the dwarves in tow. That is because in my recent video on the GW Grails that I am searching for, I talked about one particular mini that's not that mini, but has been something that I've really wanted to get hold of, and I've been lucky enough, and thanks to the generosity of one of my patrons, I have been able to get my hands on the Marauder Giant. Honestly, look at this guy. Absolutely incredible. Thank you so much to Jason, one of my patrons. He's been incredibly generous and sent me this unassembled Marauder Giant. I am stunned by his kindness and by how amazing this model still is. I am in awe. I just can't wait to put it together. So yeah, there is a lot to do here, as well as still assembling quite a few of these guys. I need to paint them all, as discussed earlier, which we're gonna get on top of it. Don't worry. But we've got Jason's Giant, we've got the rest of the Nuln Ironsides, I've got Manan's Blades, the Gargoyles of Bertrand Barda, and another Free Company to put together. My pile of opportunity is looking pretty good right now. But there are some other things that I still want to add to this army. I still need to find a good miniature to represent the noble general at its head, Ponsard Trudot himself. I've not yet been able to put my finger on what exactly I want for this miniature. I was looking at Volton, because I think there's some cool stances that the different Volton miniatures do, but I'm not too sure. I think I'm going to have to keep looking and see if I can find something that really works for Ponsard. I also need one more ogre to round out the 5-sided coin, my unit of mercenary ogres who work for Glug Halfcut. I'm now pretty confident that I'm going to be using the Cities of Sigmar ogre, but replacing the gunner and the crow's nest with a halfling, maybe even a halfling guide, I don't know. And I know I said I'm avoiding cavalry because it doesn't quite make sense out in the marshes, but I think that the Pistoliers of the Empire could ride in this army without too much danger from the marshes. And ever since I was a kid, and my friend lived near a pub called the Moss Trooper, I've always loved that term. And there's some pretty interesting history to explore behind it as well. So I think a unit of Moss Trooper mounted mercenaries would be pretty cool, and would give me some tactical options on the battlefield as well. And of course, we haven't really talked about the model that got me started on this Marienburg project in the first place. The Marienburg class landship. Well, I originally bought one earlier this year, which is what galvanized the whole plan in my mind, but I haven't assembled it quite yet. And I was recently able to acquire a second one. Without crew, a Burgermeister made me an offer I just couldn't refuse. So I more or less have 2 landships for this army now, which is very, very cool, but neither is assembled, Neither is painted. They are both full of dreams, though. So I'm going to talk more about the landships on the next episode of the diary. For now, I'm going to leave it there. I apologize that it's a shorter update than I might have liked, and I've not had any painted minis to show you. I've talked about it at length, so I'm not going to summarize it again. I've got my plan. My hope is that by the next update in a month or so, which I hopefully will meet, I will have some miniatures to share, and I will have made more progress on this army, because I want to get it onto the battlefield. I really would love to have some great games over the Christmas period, as well as in the new year, when presumably the old world is going to be arriving at some point next year, hopefully. So I'm going to have a lot of excuses to play Warhammer. These guys need to be ready for the tabletop. So I'm on the clock right now. I'm looking forward to it, though. I'm energized. I'm excited. I've got my plan. I'm sticking to my plan. It's all about the plan. Keep your fingers and paintbrushes crossed for me. And next time, we'll see what I've been able to do. Thank you very much for watching. I am Jordan, and this is Jordan Sorcery. You know what, Martha? I'm glad that you slept through this whole video, because otherwise I know that you would not have been able to avoid telling everybody about my secret sea elves.